Before we get into defining what a relapse looks like in alcohol and drug addiction, I'm going to go ahead and read to you the definition per the Merriam-Webster dictionary of what relapse is. The definition of relapse is the act or instance of backsliding, worsening, or subsiding, a recurrence of symptoms of a disease after a period of improvement, and to slip or fall back into a former or worse state. So families will often say to us, my loved one has relapsed. And when I hear what they're saying or how the relapse has occurred, I often have to correct families and educate them on the fact that their loved one hasn't relapsed. They've often resumed. Because if you go back to the definition I just went over, you have to basically be sober in order to relapse. So in other words, if you're in treatment and you use right after treatment, or you're in jail for 6 months and you use right when you get out, that is not a relapse. That is called resuming, because what we look at as a relapse in addiction is behaviors that lead to the addiction reverting back to an old way of thinking. So when you think about the addict or alcoholic's behaviors, restlessness, irritability, discontent, flipping the script, it's everybody else's fault, and resentments. So when somebody is sober and they stop working a program and they start reverting back to their old behaviors, the chemical relapse is almost inevitable. So a lot of times people will say, well, how do we know if they've relapsed? I can always say the tell is in the behaviors, right? We have to watch the hips and not the lips. And then if somebody does relapse or even resumes in many of the cases that we deal with, you always want to go back to the article that I put on the Kraft model of intervention, where we never reward bad behavior, we only reward positive behavior. So if somebody goes back to using drugs or alcohol, or even back to the old behaviors that lead up to the chemical relapse, the family always wants to either contact us or get with their Al-Anon groups or whatever support system they have to discuss holding boundaries and holding their loved one accountable. Because if they decide to go back to active addiction, or they decide to go back to being angry, miserable, resentful, etc., then the strong suggestion would be by many professionals to protect yourself from that and to make sure that you don't get sucked back into that vortex of addiction.